Hello there, kia ora. Last week, Local Government Minister Simeon took 5 minutes out of his busy schedule of going wee down the slide at the parliamentary playground to tell local body authorities that they need to start focusing on need-to-haves, not nice-to-haves, which is really interesting for a few reasons. First of all, there's the fact that the idea of need-to-have and nice-to-have with this government include needing to have massive tax cuts for landlords and millionaires, and it's nice to have working hospitals, school staff, and police. On top of that, the idea of what a council actually does is really confusing for a whole bunch of right-wing politicians and commentators. They don't seem to understand exactly how the law in this area works and focus on what council do in terms of core services. That might be things like taking away the trash that isn't making those comments on Facebook, or roads, or dealing with the pipe infrastructure for things like Three Waters, which they got handed back to them at the beginning of this term and then told you have to pay for absolutely everything, which has increased exponentially the amount of rates that people have to pay across the country. Anyway, those are some of the things that councils deal with, but the law itself is actually pretty broad. Under the Act 2002 for local government, the purpose of local government is literally defined in one sentence. It's to promote the social, economic, environmental, and cultural well-being of communities in the present and the future. Now, generally when a right-wing commentator turns around and says something like, we need to focus on the needs, not the nices, they generally use that as a code for cutting back on a range of things like the creative sector. The creative sector that brought in $14.9 billion to the economy in 2022. It's one of our fastest growing areas, and it's one of the fastest evolving and the most innovative when we see how things changed dramatically during the COVID pandemic height, as well as afterwards with changing technologies. It is an essential cornerstone to our future economy. But don't worry, you can cut that. That's apparently just a nice to have. Other things that get included with this generally include areas like road safety campaigns. That's also considered a nice to have. Mostly the comments you'll hear are going to be about how road safety measures slow traffic down. And generally speaking, that's because these people have tiny ding-dongs according to research, and they just want to get places faster, and somehow the two of them are linked. Again, according to the research. The reality is, though, that having cycle lane infrastructure in place reduces fatalities for all road users. It makes the roads safer for everybody. In fact, the areas that tend to see the biggest increases in safety are where you have separated bike lanes more specifically for cycling. And one of the outcomes is that it tends to make women feel safer as well when it comes to both driving and using cycle lanes, and having them there increases the amount of cycle usage. But apparently that's a nice to have, not to need to have, because, I don't know, they don't want to admit how big or tiny the ding-dongs are. It's confusing. The other thing that this government has shown really specifically it considers a nice to have is any connection at all to Te Ao Māori, because that's just how this government rolls. Finally, other areas that tend to get kicked down the line with this kind of stuff are your libraries, your museums, your zoos, anything that's essentially a fun day out. Your parks, your playgrounds, all of those areas are considered nice to haves, not need to haves, which don't fall within the remit of the law itself, which again states social, economic, environmental, and cultural well-being are the areas that your councils need to focus on. Every time you get a right-wing commentator who tells you to focus on things like roads and pipes, they're doing that really specifically to undermine the influence of areas like the creative sector or the work that people in, say, bike safety campaigns do. They focus solely on what they want, and they call it economic responsibility. But the idea of gutting things which have huge economic impact because they see it as a nice to have, not a need to have, shows really short-sighted thinking, really problematic outlook on what councils can do, what they can achieve, and the potential that they've got for creating amazing communities when they've got the skills and resources available to them to do so. It's certainly not an easy place to be because councils have funding issues, and they have for a very long time, because the rating systems just aren't enough to cover what councils need to do. But as the government said, they've got no money apparently, because tax cuts for billionaires and landlords have to come first before dealing at all with any of the issues that your local government is going to have to tackle.